The survey station was labeled wrong. That's not what made me stop. Survey stations get mislabeled all the time: transposed letters, smudged numbers in a wet book, someone calling out R14 when they mean R40. You catch it in the data, you correct it, you move on. That's the job. What made me stop was that the station was already there. We hadn't placed it yet. I need to go back further than that. My name is Corinne Lusk. For 5 years I've been an active survey caver with the Southeastern Karst Conservancy, a regional nonprofit that partners with landowners and state geological surveys to document and map cave systems across the Cumberland Plateau in Tennessee. If you know caving, you know the tag, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and you know this is some of the most vertically complex karst geology in the United States. Limestone stacked on limestone, river systems that vanished underground 10 million years ago and carved passage networks that nobody has fully mapped. Our work is unglamorous. We go into holes. We measure them. We come out and turn the measurements into maps. Then we go back and do it again deeper. The specific system I need to talk about is called Anderbosch. It's on private land in Grundy County, on a wooded ridgetop owned by a family who've been permitting survey access since 2019. The entrance is a sloping walk-in at the base of a sandstone cap, about 4 feet high, opening into a descending passage that the original survey team named the foyer. Below the foyer, the cave drops through a series of Vados Canyon passages, tall, narrow, water-carved channels, before opening into larger phreatic tubes at depth. The first major room, Credenza Hall, sits about 300 vertical feet below the entrance. Below Credenza Hall, the cave continues through breakdown and flowstone constrictions into territory that, as of last spring, had been surveyed to a depth of about 580 feet and a total passage length of just over 4 miles. I should describe how the survey works, because the details matter. A cave survey team is typically 3 people. The point person goes first. They scout the passage ahead, choose where to set the next survey station, and mark it, usually with a small piece of flagging tape and a station designation written in permanent marker on the rock. The instrument person stays at the previous station and reads the measurements, compass bearing, vertical inclination, and distance to the new station, using either a traditional compass inclinometer setup or, more commonly now, a Distox, a modified laser distance meter fitted with an electronic compass and clinometer that transmits data via Bluetooth. The sketcher stays near the instrument person, records all the data in a waterproof survey book, and draws a to-scale plan view and sometimes a profile sketch of the passage, noting features like formations, water, breakdown, and unsurveyed leads. The sketcher sets the pace. The sketcher is usually the busiest and coldest person on the team. I'm a sketcher. Have been since my 2nd year. I'm good at it. I'm patient, I have clean drafting habits, and I don't rush the cross-sections. That matters for what happened, because a sketcher's entire job is to produce an accurate record of what exists. Every line in my book represents something I saw, measured, and confirmed. My books are archived with the Conservancy. They're the primary source documents for the Anderbosch map. If something appears in my book, it's real. If it doesn't, it hasn't been surveyed. That was the assumption I operated under until the expedition last October. The Conservancy organized a 4-day underground camp to push the survey deeper into the system. The lower sections of Anderbosch had shown promising leads, multiple going passages below the terminal breakdown at a feature we called the Sill, a low, wide crawl-over wet flowstone that marked the deepest surveyed point. The plan was to establish an underground camp at Credenza Hall, stage supplies there over 2 pre-trips, then spend 4 days surveying downward from the Sill into Virgin Passage. Our team was 6 people. I'll use first names only. Myself, sketcher, secondary team. Danielle, point person, secondary team. 5 years of vertical tag experience. Marcus, instrument, secondary team. Newer, but precise. Former land surveyor, which meant his compass work was immaculate. Glenn, point person, primary team. Expedition leader. 12 years with the Conservancy. He'd been on the original 2019 Anderbosch survey. Nina, instrument, primary team. Glenn's usual partner. Quiet, methodical. Russ, sketcher, primary team. Older than all of us, maybe early 60s. He'd been surveying caves since the 1980s and had notebooks archived across 4 states. The 2 teams would leapfrog sections, one team surveying while the other rested at camp, then switching. This is standard for multi-day pushes. It keeps the work continuous and gives people time to eat, sleep, and process data. We staged supplies on September 28 and October 5. Camp went in on October 11. Sleeping pads, synthetic bags rated to 40 degrees, a small stove system for boiling water, sealed food bags, extra batteries, and the full survey kit for each team. Credenza Hall is large enough that 6 people could spread out comfortably without being on top of each other. The temperature at that depth was a steady 56 degrees. Humidity was close to 100%. It's the kind of environment where you never feel warm and you never feel dry, but you adapt. The first survey day was October 12. Glenn's primary team went down first, starting from the last existing station at the sill, Station AB 412, and pushing into the passage below. My team rested, ate, reviewed maps, and waited. They were gone about 9 hours. When they came back, Glenn was energized in a way I hadn't seen from him before. He said the passage below the sill opened dramatically. The tight flowstone crawl gave way, after about 40 meters, to a descending corridor of clean-washed limestone with a ceiling height of 15 feet or more. They'd set stations AB 413 through AB 441 and surveyed just under 600 meters of new passage, mostly trending southwest and descending steadily. Russ handed me his survey book so I could cross-reference his sketches with the data. This was routine, both sketchers would review each other's work so the final map maintained consistency. His notes were meticulous as always. Clean station labels, neat shot data, passage dimensions recorded at every station, cross-sections every 5th station. I plotted his line on my grid paper using his bearings and distances, and the passage made sense. A gently curving, southwest-trending canyon, narrowing in places, opening in others, with a few short side leads noted but not entered. One thing caught my eye. At station AB 429, Russ had drawn a small symbol in the margin of his sketch, a circle with a diagonal line through it. I'd never seen him use it before. I asked him what it meant. He looked at the page for a moment, then said, "Disturbed floor." I asked what he meant by that. The sediment was uneven. Looked like something had moved through it. I flagged it so we'd remember to look more carefully next time. That was a reasonable explanation. Animals occasionally penetrate deep into cave systems, raccoons, cave rats, even the rare bobcat. The tag has documented bats roosting at considerable depths. Disturbed sediment wasn't strange. I logged his note and moved on. My team, Danielle, Marcus, and I, started our first push on October 13, picking up where Glenn's team had stopped at AB 441. We descended through the corridor they'd surveyed, and I confirmed Russ's sketches against the passage as we moved through. Everything matched. The new section was beautiful, pale gray limestone walls, water-polished and clean, with occasional clusters of small stalactites and a thin film of water moving along the floor in places. The air was good. Slightly elevated CO2, which you can feel as a faint heaviness in your breathing, but well within safe limits. When we passed station AB 429, I paused. The floor there was a flat expanse of wet clay sediment, the kind that records tracks like a mold. And Russ was right. Something had disturbed it. There were irregular depressions in the clay, not crisp enough to identify as tracks from any specific animal, but clearly not natural erosion patterns. They looked almost like they'd been smoothed over. Like something had moved through and then the surface had been partially reset, the way a receding water film might soften footprints. I made a note. We kept moving. Below AB 441, the passage continued to descend. The corridor maintained its height but narrowed to about 4 feet wide in places, a classic Vados Canyon profile, tall and tight. Danielle moved confidently at point, choosing station locations with good line of sight. Marcus read the Disto X cleanly. I recorded, sketched, and kept pace. We set stations AB 442 through AB 467 over the next 7 hours, adding another 420 meters of survey and reaching a depth we estimated at roughly 710 feet below the entrance. At AB 467, the passage opened into a modest chamber, maybe 30 feet across, irregularly shaped, with a ceiling that arched up into darkness beyond the reach of our lights. The floor was a mix of breakdown blocks and fine silt. 2 passages continued from the far side, one heading roughly south, the other curving east. Both were going passage, both large enough to walk in. We were tired. It was time to head back. Before we turned around, Danielle walked to the edge of the chamber to get a quick look down each lead. She came back and said the south passage looked larger and had airflow. The east passage was smaller and dry. Then she said, "There's something on the wall in the south one." I asked what she meant. Like a mark. On the rock. I don't know. The 3 of us walked to the south passage entrance. Danielle pointed her headlamp at the left wall, about 5 feet up. There was a mark on the wall. It was small. Maybe 3 inches long. A single horizontal line scored into the limestone, with a short vertical line descending from its center. Like a very crude, very deliberate T. It wasn't a natural feature. Limestone fractures along bedding planes and joints, and those fractures have characteristic patterns. They follow the rock's crystalline structure and stress history. This mark didn't follow any natural plane. It had been cut. Not deeply, maybe a millimeter or 2 into the surface, but with clear intention. The edges were slightly rounded, suggesting it wasn't fresh, but it wasn't ancient either. It hadn't been mineralized over or coated in flowstone. It looked like someone had scratched it with a hard point within the last few years. Maybe the last few decades at most. Marcus said, "Survey marker." I checked my records. No previous survey had reached this depth. The Conservancy's Anderbosch project was the deepest systematic effort in this system. Before 2019, the cave had only been explored to about 200 feet by local cavers who hadn't published formal survey data. There were no recorded expeditions below the sill. "It's not ours," I said. "And it's not in any of the historical access records." Danielle photographed it. I sketched it in my book with a note, anthropogenic mark, left wall, south lead entrance, AB 467. Not associated with any known survey. Possible prior unauthorized access. We headed back to camp. When we arrived at Credenza Hall, Glenn and Nina were awake, preparing food. Russ was in his sleeping bag, reading. I showed Glenn the photograph on Danielle's camera and described the mark. He studied it for a while. Then he said, "Could be old-timers. Before the landowner started permitting. People have been poking around these ridges for 100 years. At 700 feet of depth," I said. "Through the sill. The sill might not have always been that tight. Water levels change. Flowstone grows." That was technically true. I let it go. Glenn's team went back down on October 14 to push the South Passage below AB 467. My team rested. When they returned that evening, Glenn was quieter than he'd been after the first push. Russ's survey book showed they'd set stations AB 468 through AB 491, adding another 350 meters. The South Passage had continued to descend, opening further into a broad, low-ceilinged gallery with standing water in places. The depth was now approaching 850 feet. I reviewed Russ's sketches. Clean, as always. But I noticed the circle with diagonal line symbol again, this time at 3 separate stations. UB 471. UB 479. UB 488. Disturbed floor? I asked. Russ nodded. More of the same. Clay displacement. Consistent with something moving through periodically. An animal at 850 feet. It's unusual, he said. But not impossible. I looked at his sketch for AB 488 more carefully. He'd noted the passage dimensions as 12 feet wide, 4 feet high, with the floor composed of wet silt over bedrock. In the margin, next to the disturbed floor symbol, he'd written a single word in small, precise letters. Recent. I asked him about it. He said the disturbance at that station looked fresher than the others. The silt hadn't been smoothed by water. The depressions were crisp-edged. Whatever had moved through there, he said, had done so within days. Not weeks. Not months. Days. That night in camp, I couldn't sleep. The cave was silent except for the faint, distant sound of water, a trickle somewhere below us, transmitted through the rock. I lay in my bag and thought about the mark on the wall. The T shape. The disturbed sediment. The word recent. At some point I realized I was listening. Not for the water. For something else. For a sound I couldn't have identified even if I'd heard it. A sound that would mean the passage below us wasn't empty. I heard nothing. That was worse. October 15th. My team's second push. We descended past AB 467 into the South Passage. This time I paid closer attention to the floor. At AB 471, the first of Russ's flagged stations, I saw what he'd described. The wet clay was deformed. Shallow, oblong depressions, irregularly spaced, following the center of the passage where the sediment was deepest. Not animal tracks in any recognizable pattern. More like drag marks, or the impressions left by something shifting its weight in a way that didn't correspond to any quadrupedal or bipedal gait I could picture. They were wide, maybe 8 inches across, and they overlapped in places, as if whatever made them had passed through multiple times along slightly different paths. I photographed everything. I sketched the depressions with measurements. And I kept going. We pushed beyond AB 491, Glenn's terminal station, and entered unsurveyed passage. Danielle at point, Marcus on the disto X, me on the book. We set AB 492 through AB 514 over the next 6 hours. The gallery continued to descend, its ceiling lowering until we were stooping, then crawling in places, before it opened again into taller canyon passage. The air was heavier now. Not dangerously so. I was monitoring CO2 with a handheld detector, and it read 1.2%, elevated but manageable, but the heaviness had a quality to it that I want to describe accurately. It felt inhabited. I know how that sounds. I don't mean it supernaturally. I mean that in deep cave passage, the air has a specific character, cool, wet, minerally, clean. This air had that, but underneath it, a faint biological warmth. The kind you feel in a barn. In a den. In a space where something living breathes regularly. At station AB 508, Danielle stopped and called me forward. Corinne. Come look at this. I handed the survey book to Marcus and moved up. The passage at AB 508 was about 10 feet wide and 8 feet tall, a comfortable walking passage. The floor was dry here, hard-packed clay over limestone bedrock. And on the floor, against the left wall, arranged in a rough line, were 7 stones. Not formation. Not breakdown. 7 stones, each about the size of a fist, lined up parallel to the wall, evenly spaced about 6 inches apart. They were river cobbles. Rounded, smooth, made of a chert or quartzite that was not native to the surrounding limestone. They had been carried in from somewhere else. They had been placed. Marcus came up behind me. He looked at the stones. He looked at me. Nobody said anything for a long time. Survey marker, he said, echoing his own words from 2 days ago. But this time his voice was different. There's no survey to mark, I said. Danielle was already moving her light across the walls, the ceiling, the floor beyond the stones. There's more, she said. 30 feet further down the passage, on a narrow shelf of rock about waist height, was a shallow depression that had been artificially widened. Something had been scooped or ground out of the soft limestone, not a natural solution pocket but a deliberate concavity, like a bowl scraped into the rock surface. Inside it was a small amount of powderitite rock, calcium powder, essentially, as if someone had ground the stone and collected the dust. For what purpose, I had no idea. And beyond that, another 20 feet, on the right wall this time, another mark. Not AT this time. A single vertical line with 2 short horizontal strokes extending left from its top and bottom. Like a bracket. Like a very simplified letter E turned on its back. Cut into the rock at the same shallow depth as the first one. I sketched all of it. I recorded everything. My hands were steady. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't panicking. I was doing my job. But the nature of my job was shifting under me, because I was no longer just recording the geometry of a cave passage. I was recording evidence of occupation. Not ancient occupation. Not archaeological. Not the kind of thing you find in textbooks about Paleo-Indian shelter caves with their fire-blackened ceilings and chipped stone tools stratified under thousands of years of sediment. This was recent. The stones were clean. The powder was fresh. The marks were unweathered. Someone was using these passages. Currently. Actively. At nearly 900 feet below the surface of the Earth. We surveyed through to AB 514, where the passage hit a T-junction, one branch heading roughly southwest, the other turning sharply north. The airflow at the junction was notable, a steady, cool draft coming from the southwest branch. Danielle wanted to push further. I made the call to turn around. We'd been underground for almost 10 hours. We were past our turnaround time. And I needed to talk to Glenn. The walk back was the quietest 3 hours I've spent in a cave. We moved through the passage in a file, headlamps bouncing off the walls, the only sounds are footsteps and the occasional rustle of gear. Nobody spoke. At one point, as we passed back through the gallery section where the sediment disturbances were most visible, I stopped and shined my light back the way we'd come. The passage behind us was empty. But the air from that direction was warm. It should not have been warm. Cave air at that depth, in that geology, is stable. 56 degrees. The warmth I felt was slight, maybe 2 degrees above ambient, and it was moving. Coming toward us from below. From the direction we'd just left. I didn't mention it to the others. I'm not sure why. Maybe because saying it aloud would have made it something I couldn't retract. Back at Credenza Hall, I found Glenn and Russ sitting together, and Glenn had his maps spread out on a flat rock he'd been using as a table. He looked up when we came in and his expression was neutral in a way I'd learned to read as tightly controlled. "How far did you get?" he asked. 514. T-junction. Strong airflow southwest. "What did you find?" I told him. The stones. The carved depression. The second wall mark. The biological warmth of the air. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he looked at Russ. Russ said, "Show her." Glenn pulled a folded sheet of paper from his personal notebook, not his survey book, his private notebook, the one he kept for expedition planning and personal observations. He unfolded it and held it so I could see. It was a photocopy of a hand-drawn map. Not a formal survey map, the lines were freehand, the scale was rough, and there were no station numbers. But it showed a cave passage system that was unmistakably similar in general outline to the lower sections of Anderbosch. The descent from a low crawl. The long southwest corridor. The gallery. The T-junction. Below the T-junction, the map continued. The southwest branch descended through a series of rooms and constrictions, with annotations in handwriting I didn't recognize. Some of the annotations were measurements, rough distances in feet. Others were single words or short phrases. Flat floor. Wide. Dry. Soot marks on ceiling. Cut steps. Bowl with ash. Second level. Rope marks on lip. Sound below. The map continued for what looked like several hundred more feet of depth, trending consistently southwest, before it terminated at a feature labeled with a single sentence. Door in the rock, closed. I looked at Glenn. "Where did you get this?" "Vernon Bosch," he said. "The landowner's father. He gave it to me in 2020, a year after we started the project. Said his own father had drawn it in the 1960s. Said his father had found the lower cave and gone in alone, multiple times, over the course of a year. And then one day he stopped going and never talked about it again. Why didn't you tell us this before the expedition?" "Because I wasn't sure it was real. The upper portions of his map don't match our survey. The entrance he drew approaches from a different angle. I thought it was a different cave, or a fabrication, or a conflation of memories. It didn't correspond to anything we'd found." He paused. "Until yesterday. When we hit the gallery, I recognized the shape. Not from our survey data. From this map. The wall marks, I said. The stones. Vernon's father drew symbols at certain points on his map, Glenn said. He pointed. I could see them, small geometric marks in the margins, a T-shape, a bracket shape, and others further down that I hadn't encountered yet. He was copying what he found, I said. Or making them, Glenn said. I don't know. I stared at the map. At the words cut steps. At soot marks on ceiling. At door in the rock, closed. Glenn. If his father wasn't there in the 1960s and there were already soot marks and cut steps, then whatever he found wasn't his either. Someone was there before him. Yes. Who? I don't know. Is someone there now? Glenn didn't answer. Russ was looking at the floor. Nina, who had been listening from her sleeping bag, sat up. The air, Nina said. The warm air coming up from below. I felt it too. On our push. I didn't say anything because I thought I was imagining it. You weren't imagining it, I said. Warm air in a cave means a heat source, Marcus said. He'd been standing behind me, still in his survey gear. A large mammal, a geothermal feature, or a fire, Danielle said. Nobody responded to that. I didn't sleep that night either. Not because I was afraid, though I was, but because the cave was doing something it hadn't done before. The silence had a rhythm. Not a sound, exactly. A pulsation in the stillness, as if the air pressure in the passage below us was fluctuating at very slow intervals. I timed it with my watch. Every 9 minutes, roughly, I felt a faint compression in my ears, the sensation you get when a door opens in a pressurized building. Then a release. Then stillness. Then again. Breathing. Not mine. Not anyone in camp. Something much larger. Something structural. As if the cave itself were a lung, and whatever was deeper down was the diaphragm. October 16th. Our last full day underground. The plan had been to push the southwest branch below the T-junction. But that morning, when we gathered to discuss assignments, Glenn changed the objective. He said both teams would go down together. All 6 of us. He said we'd survey to the junction and then reassess based on conditions. I asked why both teams. He said, safety margin. That was a valid operational reason, but I'd never seen Glenn change a plan on the last day of an expedition unless something had concerned him enough overnight to override the schedule. I didn't push it. We descended as a group. 6 people in a file, moving through the passages we'd spent 3 days surveying, past our neatly flagged stations and my careful sketches rendered in the rock. At AB 429, the first disturbed floor station, Russ slowed and looked down. I saw him scan the sediment and then keep moving without a word. At the gallery section, the air was heavier than the day before. My CO2 meter read 1.4%. Still safe. But climbing. We reached the T-junction at AB 514 and stopped. The southwest passage breathed at us, that slow, warm exhalation I'd felt at camp. Up close, it was unmistakable. The air coming from that passage was at least 3 or 4 degrees above the surrounding rock temperature. And it carried something. Not a smell exactly. A density. A quality that made me think of basements. Of closed rooms. Of spaces that have held warmth for a long time. Glenn stood at the junction and looked down the southwest branch. He held up his hand for silence. We all stood still. From somewhere below, not close, but not impossibly far, came a sound. A single, brief percussive note. Like a stone being set down on stone. Not dropped. Placed. Then nothing. We waited for 3 full minutes. I counted them. Nothing else came. Glenn turned to the group and said, quietly, "We survey the North Branch." No one argued. We split into our teams and began surveying the North Branch of the T-junction. My team took point. We set stations AB 515 through AB 538 over the next 5 hours, documenting a passage that curved east and then southeast, narrowing into a tight but passable canyon with a small stream running along the floor. The passage was clean. No marks on the walls. No disturbed sediment. No stones. No warm air. It felt like normal cave. It felt like relief. But at station AB 533, something was wrong. I'd chosen a station location on a small ledge above the stream, a clean piece of limestone where I could mark the station designation clearly. I wiped the surface with my sleeve, uncapped my marker, and leaned into right, AB 533. There was already writing there. Small. Precise. In faded black ink. On the limestone surface of a passage that, according to every record in existence, had never been entered by a human being until 15 minutes ago when Danielle set foot in it. The writing said, R14. I stared at it. I put my fingertip on it. The ink was dry, slightly chalky, partially absorbed into the stone's surface the way permanent marker does when exposed to moisture over time. It wasn't fresh. But it wasn't ancient. Months. Maybe a year. Maybe 2. "Marcus," I said. "Come here." He came. He saw it. He took a photograph. Then he said, very carefully, "That's a station label." "Yes." "From a survey." "Yes." "Whose survey?" I didn't answer because I didn't know, and the possible answers were all wrong. No one had surveyed this passage. No one had been permitted into this cave except conservancy teams. The landowner's records were clear. The access gate on the entrance, a locked steel gate installed in 2019, had no signs of tampering. We were the first people to enter this passage. Except that someone had already been here, set a survey station, labeled it R14, and moved on. We kept surveying. I was watching the walls now. At AB 536, I found another one. R18. Same ink. Same handwriting, small, precise, slanting slightly left. On a flat piece of wall at chest height, exactly where a competent surveyor would place a station marked for easy reading. And at AB 538, where the passage turned sharply and the stream disappeared into a low slot. R23. The numbering was sequential but the increments were uneven, 14, 18, 23. That suggested a survey with stations we hadn't found yet, either behind us or inside passages we'd bypassed. Whoever had numbered these stations had been conducting a systematic survey of their own, in a cave they had no authorized access to, at a depth of over 800 feet, using a naming convention, a single letter followed by sequential numbers, that was clean and consistent but didn't match any project in the Conservancy's database or any state or federal survey archive I was aware of. The letter was R. I reported everything to Glenn when we returned to the junction. His team had also pushed their section and found nothing unusual in the southwest's upper reaches. They hadn't gone deep, just a few hundred meters. When I told him about the station labels, he closed his eyes. Not in frustration. In recognition. Like a piece clicking into a position he'd hoped it wouldn't fit. He opened his personal notebook and turned to a page in the back. He'd transcribed a list from Vernon Bosch's father's hand-drawn map, the annotations, the measurements, the single words. Near the bottom of the list, he'd written stations marked with R and numbers. Did not count how many. They were not his. Vernon's father, in the 1960s, had found these same markings, and had noted, 60 years ago, that they were not his own. Glenn, I said. How old are these? The ones you found today? Yes. You said the ink looked months to maybe 2 years old. At most. The ones Vernon's father saw were over 60 years ago. So either the same person has been marking this cave for 6 decades. Or someone is maintaining them, Glenn said. Refreshing them. Like maintaining a trail. A trail to where? That's what I wanted to ask but couldn't, because the answer was on the map in his notebook. The map that ended at a sentence I kept coming back to, the way your tongue keeps finding a broken tooth. Door in the rock, closed. We broke camp that evening. Packed everything. Made the long ascent back through the system, up through the gallery, through the corridor, through the sill, through the upper passages, through the foyer, and out. When I stepped through the entrance gate into the October night air of the Tennessee Ridge, the temperature was 41 degrees and the wind was blowing. It felt like surfacing from deep water. For about 30 seconds, the world felt real again: trees, sky, dirt, the truck parked on the logging road, the smell of leaf rot and engine oil. Then I looked back at the entrance and felt the cave still breathing behind the gate. The slow compression. The release. That 9-minute rhythm. Even from outside, if I stood still and listened, I could almost feel it in the ground beneath my boots. We drove back to town in silence. Glenn dropped me off last. Before I got out of the truck, he said, "I'm going to talk to Vernon." About his father. About who else has a key to the gate. Nobody else has a key, Glenn. We installed that gate. I know. There's no other entrance. We'd have found it in the survey. I know. So either someone is getting past a locked steel gate and descending 800 feet through technical passage without leaving any trace on the upper cave, or they're not entering from above, Glenn said. He said it flat. Like a fact. Like a survey reading. I got out of the truck. He drove away. Over the next 3 weeks, I processed the survey data from the expedition. I entered every shot into the mapping software, 4 days of measurements from 2 teams, all the bearings and distances and inclinations translated into a 3-dimensional line plot of the cave. I drafted the passage walls around the line plot using my sketches and Russ's sketches. I annotated the leads, the features, the formations. I built the map. And I kept coming back to their stations. R14 at RAB 533. R18 at RAB 536. R23 at RAB 538. 3 data points from an unknown survey. I plotted their positions on my map and looked at the spacing. If the unseen survey followed a similar methodology to ours, stations set at natural line-of-sight intervals in the passage, then the gaps between R14 and R18 and R23 implied a much longer survey extending in both directions. Dozens of stations, minimum. Maybe hundreds. An entire parallel map of the cave, produced by someone with equipment, skill, and sustained access. I searched the Tennessee Cave Survey database. No record of a project using the R prefix in Grundy County. I searched the NSS archives. Nothing. I contacted 2 independent cavers who'd been active in TAG since the 1990s and asked if they'd ever heard of unauthorized survey work in Anderbosch or any adjacent system. They hadn't. In late October, Glenn called me. He'd spoken to Vernon Bosch. Vernon confirmed that his father, Earl, had explored the lower cave in the 1960s and had stopped abruptly after what Vernon described as a bad scare. Vernon didn't know the details. Earl had never elaborated. He'd sealed the entrance with a rock pile, not the current gate location, but an older, smaller opening further along the ridge that had since collapsed naturally. Earl died in 1987. But Vernon told Glenn one more thing. In the last year of his life, Earl had become fixated on a specific question. He asked Vernon several times, in different ways, whether Vernon had ever gone into the cave without telling him. Vernon always said no. Then Earl asked whether Vernon had ever heard anyone in the cave. Vernon said he didn't understand the question. Earl didn't explain it. Glenn asked Vernon if he had any of Earl's papers. Vernon said most were thrown away after Earl died, but he had a box of miscellaneous items in his barn. Glenn asked to see it. Vernon agreed. The box contained old receipts, a few photographs, some hand tools, and a small hardcover notebook with a marbled cover. The notebook was Earl's. Inside, in pencil, were survey-style measurements, distances in feet, compass bearings in degrees, crude but consistent. No station numbers. But interspersed with the measurements were observations. Passage continues past the stones. Floor is swept clean. Marks on the wall do not match mine. Someone else has been here. They are more careful than me. Found ash in the bowl. It was warm. I left immediately. The sounds are not echoes. They respond when I am quiet. When I make noise they stop. Third visit to the second level. Cut steps go deeper than I can follow without rope. The air from below is warm and steady. It smells like nothing I can identify. I have decided not to go back. Whatever is down there, it knows the cave better than I do. It has been there longer. The marks I am following are not directions. They are boundaries. The survey stations are not for mapping. They are for defining a territory. I am not exploring. I am trespassing. The last entry was a single line. The door was open today. I did not look inside. I went home. Glenn sent me photographs of every page. I read them in my apartment at 2 in the morning, sitting at my desk with the cave map pinned to the wall behind me. I read the entry about the door 3 times. Each time, my eyes moved from the phone screen to the map, to the lowest point we'd surveyed, the T-junction at AB 514, where the southwest passage descended toward whatever Earl Bosch found 60 years ago. Door in the rock, closed. That was on his map. The door was open today. That was in his notebook. Something had opened it. Or someone. In November, I went back to the Conservancy office to check something. In the digital archive, every survey project has a master file that includes the raw data, the processed line plot, and metadata, who surveyed, when, what equipment was used. Anderbosch's master file was routine. but I wanted to look at something specific. The loop closures. In cave surveying, when two different survey paths connect to the same point, forming a loop, you can calculate the closure error, the difference between where the survey says the point should be and where it actually is. Small closure errors mean accurate data. Large errors mean a blunder somewhere, a misread compass, a transposed number, a wrong station connection. We had one loop closure in the new data. My team's North Branch survey, AB 515 to AB 538, connected back to Glenn's primary survey through a side passage we'd noticed on day 2. The loop closed within acceptable limits, about 0.4% error, well within grade 5 standards. But when I looked at the raw data more carefully, I noticed something I'd missed during initial processing. The loop closure calculation included a station that neither team had set. Station AB 527. It appeared in the processed data as a valid station, coordinates, passage dimensions, the works. It connected to AB 526, set by Glenn's team, and AB 528, also Glenn's team. The shot data was clean. Bearing, distance, inclination, all within normal parameters. But AB 527 did not appear in either survey book. Not in Russ's book. Not in mine. Not in any sketcher's notes from the entire expedition. I checked the DistoX logs. The device records every shot fired, time-stamped. On October 14th, Nina's DistoX recorded shots for AB 524, AB 525, AB 526, AB 528, AB 529. No shot for AB 527. The station existed in the processed data but not in any primary source. I called Glenn. He checked his records. No memory of station AB 527. No mark in the cave at that location, as far as he could recall. He asked Nina. She had no memory of it either. It's a data entry error, he said. Someone fat-fingered a station in during processing. Glenn. The coordinates are internally consistent. The shot data closes the loop. If it's an error that happens to be perfectly accurate. Silence on the line. I'll rederive the loop without it, I said. See if the closure still works. I did. Without AB 527, the loop error jumped to 3.6%, far beyond acceptable. The phantom station was the one holding the loop together. Without it, our data didn't close. Which meant one of two things. Either there was a real station at that location that we'd somehow set and measured without any of us recording it or remembering it. Or someone else had inserted a single, perfectly calibrated data point into our survey that made our work more accurate than it actually was. Someone who knew our station naming convention. Who knew our survey methodology. Who had access to measurements from inside the cave. Who could produce a data point so clean it passed every quality check. I sat at my desk and stared at the number. UB 527. A station that shouldn't exist, doing exactly what a station is supposed to do, connecting one part of the map to another, making the picture cohere, filling in a gap that we didn't know was there until someone filled it for us. Like a correction. Like help. I went back to the photographs of Earl Bosch's notebook. To the entry that said, "The marks I am following are not directions. They are boundaries. The survey stations are not for mapping. They are for defining a territory." And I thought about what territory means. Not just a space you claim. A space you know. A space you have measured so precisely that you can detect any change, any intrusion, any new presence. A space you maintain. The stations in the cave weren't a survey project. They were a perimeter. And AB 527, the phantom station in our data, wasn't an error. It was a correction made by whoever maintains that perimeter. Made to our survey. Inside our data. As if they'd looked at our work, identified the gap, and fixed it. Not to sabotage. Not to mislead. To make our map more accurate. To make sure we were recording their home correctly. I haven't been back to Anderbosch. The Conservancy has scheduled a follow-up expedition for next spring, a 6-day push to continue the survey below the T-junction and explore the southwest passage toward whatever Earl Bosch found and walked away from. Glenn is leading it. He's asked me to sketch. I haven't said yes yet. Not because I'm afraid of what we'll find. I'm afraid of what's already been done for us. Every night since November, I've been reviewing the survey data, station by station, looking for more insertions. More phantom points. More corrections made by a hand I can't identify to a map I thought was mine. I've found 2 more. AB 461, in the gallery where the sediment was disturbed. A station that exists in the processed data with perfect measurements but appears in no book and no distox log. It sits at the exact point where the warm air first becomes detectable. Like a marker. Like a note that says, here is where our territory begins. And one more. Not in the deep cave. Not below the sill. Station AB 089. In the upper cave. In a passage we surveyed 2 years ago. A passage I have walked through dozens of times. A well-trafficked route between the entrance and credenza hall. AB 089 appears in the master file with coordinates that place it at a narrow point in the passage, a pinch where the ceiling lowers and you have to duck. I've ducked through that pinch 100 times. The station has measurements. Clean data. A bearing, a distance, an inclination connected to the stations on either side of it. It improves the local accuracy of the map by a small but measurable amount. It was not placed by any Conservancy surveyor. It is not in any book. It is in the upper cave. I keep thinking about what that means. If the stations are a perimeter, a boundary marking a territory, and if the phantom stations in our data are corrections, or contributions, or something I don't have a word for, then whatever is down there isn't staying down there. It's moving up. Through the data. Through the map. Through the system of measurement we built to describe a space we thought was ours to describe. We are mapping something that is simultaneously mapping us. And its map is better. Last week I opened the master file to check a detail for a presentation I'm giving at the State Geological Conference. Routine. I pulled up the line plot and zoomed out to see the whole system, entrance to terminal survey point, 4 miles of passage, 600 and some stations. The station count was wrong. I counted them manually on the screen. The master file listed 641 stations. Our survey books, every book from every trip since 2019, account for 612. 29 stations that no one set. No one recorded. No one remembers. 29 points of perfect data inside our map, stitching the picture together, filling gaps we didn't know existed, making the representation of the cave more accurate than our own measurements could achieve. 29 small, precise corrections by a surveyor who has never been seen, whose methodology is flawless, whose knowledge of the cave extends from the deepest unexplored passage to the well-lit corridor 50 feet from the entrance gate. I don't know what lives in the lower levels of Anderbosch. I don't know what Earl Bosch saw when the door was open. I don't know what made the sound at the T-junction, that single stone placed on stone, or what breathes on a 9-minute cycle through 800 feet of rock. But I know it surveys. It measures. It labels. It corrects. It maintains a record of every passage, every dimension, every angle and distance with a precision that exceeds our own instruments. And it has been doing this for at least 60 years, and probably much longer, in the dark, in silence, alone. The presentation is next Tuesday. I'll show the map. I'll present the data. I'll describe the new passage and the depth and the promising leads below the T-junction. I will not mention the 29 stations. Because if I remove them, the map falls apart. The loop closures fail. The line plot drifts. The passages don't connect. Our 5 years of survey work, our careful, meticulous, by-the-book work, only holds together because something in the dark has been quietly making it true. And I don't know how to tell a room full of geologists that the most accurate survey data in our project wasn't collected by us. That somewhere below the T-junction, past the cut steps and the warm ash and the door in the rock, something is sitting in the dark with a map of its home that is more complete than anything we will ever draw. And it has been watching our map grow toward it, station by station, year by year. And it has been helping. The spring expedition is in 4 months. Glenn says the Southwest Passage could add another 1,000 feet of depth to the system. He says Anderbosch could become one of the deepest caves in the eastern United States. He's probably right. But when I look at the master file, at those 29 stations scattered through the data like in signed letters, I don't think we're discovering the cave anymore. I think we're being invited in. And I think the map will be finished whether we go or not.